Do you have a good immune system? If you perform a Google search for building a strong immune system right now, you're going to get over 185 million responses. That tells me that it's a hot topic, especially after the last 3 or 4 years. And because it's currently winter in America, I mean, it's cold and flu season. You see it all over the news, right? So, what about chronic diseases and their relationships to the immune system? So, today we are going to address those key things that cause low immunity and then provide you with a specific pathway to building a stronger immune system and better health. The good news is that for most of us, at least, we can be very confident in our body's ability to keep us safe from serious disease, flu or otherwise. And for those that have a compromised immune system, there is a way to improve it. The sooner that you begin to course correct, the better. But our bodies are pretty resilient and they bounce back if we don't get too far gone, right? First, let's start off with a little bit of immune system history, okay? Now, I'm sure that you've heard already that your body creates immunity to a virus once you've had it. But humans knew that way back in ancient Greece time. They realized back then that people who recovered from the plague developed lifetime immunity. I mean, personally, I kind of wonder if that's not where the saying, that which does not kill you makes you stronger comes from. Now, in more recent history, many medical discoveries over the years have resulted in something called the germ theory of disease. Scientists and doctors found that germs and bacteria cause disease. Immunity to infection could be induced by a vaccine, and that the regulation of this whole process was super important to prevent antibodies from attacking healthy human cells, which is ourself, instead of the foreign invaders, which are the antigens. Now, it's important to understand something. The potential of those germs and diseases is directly influenced by the health of the host. That's you and me. That's why some people, they get the flu, they show absolutely no symptoms, or they're down for a day or two, and then other people are down for weeks, sometimes months. Just because it's cold and flu seasons right now does not necessarily mean that you and I are at risk. It really depends upon your immune system. The immune system's job is kind of like a military force, right? It's our body's primary method for keeping us safe. So not only does it recognize these foreign invaders, but it gets rid of them. And in doing so, it develops a memory or like a blueprint of what that invader looked like so that it can mount a quicker response next time. So the really amazing thing is that in a healthy host, if you're healthier, your immune system knows enough to avoid damaging the cells and the tissues of our self, including the good bacteria that is super important to keeping our immune system healthy. All of this protects us from disease-causing microorganisms from entering our body, but it also protects us from our own cells, maybe that have become cancerous, or foreign tissues or organs that have been transplanted into the bodies. That's the reason transplant patients have to take immune suppressing drugs for the rest of their lives, because otherwise their immune system would attack the new organ. As you can imagine, the immune system is incredibly complex. It's recognizing millions of pathogens that we've been exposed to over our entire lifetime, producing cells to target those pathogens, right? And then taking them out like little Pac-Man. So now that you have a basic understanding about the immune system itself, let's talk about the categories of immunity and how they work. There's the innate, the acquired, and the adaptive. So the innate immunity actually came from our ancestors, and it started with the very first humans who ever experienced a need for developing an immune system. This is our first line of defense until our adaptive immunity kicks in, but it's generally not specific to any one specific pathogen. It's just pretty much general immunity that everybody should have. Acquired immunity is what you get from your mama. It's from the placenta, the birth canal, breast milk. It's part of the reason why it's so important for babies to be delivered vaginally and to be breastfed for that first year or two until they've had time to develop their own immune system. The immune system actually continues to develop throughout adolescence and into adulthood. It does this by growing T cells and B cells. They're called lymphocytes after an exposure to an infection or virus. Remember, I told you they had little labels. So how strong an immune system mom is passing on to the kid is definitely going to impact this type of immunity. So some are stronger than others, depending upon the host, who was mom originally. So adaptive immunity is the one that we develop as we're exposed to new pathogens and germs over a lifetime. So somebody like me who's almost 60 has been exposed to an awful lot. Every single time that you're exposed to an invader germ or a pathogen, your T and B cells recognize that antigen, the bad guy, and they respond. they respond with something called an antibody, right? So these antibodies adapt, which is why upon first exposure to a specific flu, like the new flu of the season, it may take you a little bit more time to develop and activate the response. The good news is it does create lifetime immunity. Mama should really keep this in mind as you're raising kids, because if you're not allowing your children to be exposed to any germs at all, if you're the freak with the bleaching every surface and you limit their playtime with other people, you're not allowing to have pets in the home, you're constantly washing hands, you might actually be delaying their adaptive immunity from developing. And I know I'm going to catch crap for that, but that's just kind of the way it is. So the question is now, how does all of this work? So if you have an injury, let's say, or a specific, like a cut and an infection, your adaptive and your innate immune systems work together, and they travel to the site of wherever that injury or that cut may be, and they get rid of that infection, they get rid of the dead tissue, and generally speaking, inflammation is going to occur, right? It's going to trigger that response. So if you get hurt or you get cut, there's inflammation. That's what causes all of these things, all these T and B cells to head to that site. In that situation, inflammation at the site of an injury or infection is really beneficial. We want to do that, right? It's part of the reason that honestly we don't necessarily want to put ice on an injury right away. We want our body to be able to mount a response. When inflammation becomes chronic or systemic throughout your whole body, that's when you're likely to deal with chronic disease. And we don't want to deal with that. That's bad inflammation. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. So we have defenses that provide non-specific immunity, in addition to the three that I just talked about. So you've got something called mucosal immunity, which covers your respiratory and your digestive system, right? Think about like snot, when you get a cold and you've got a lot of snot. The reason you do that is because your body is creating that defense so it can start pushing all of that out and getting those germs out through your nose. You also have some in your urogenital tracts, your eyes, your ears, your exocrine system, so like your sweat glands, your mammary glands, the stomach, the digestive tract, your liver, your pancreas. Its job is to protect the surfaces of all of those systems and body parts from invaders. So in healthy adults, these mucosa-associated lymphoid tissues or mast cells contain 80% of our immune system in the entire body. So here's an example of how it works. You walk into a grocery store and somebody, close by sneezes, right? So you get a cold virus in your nose, maybe in your eyes, and if you have a healthy mucosa immune system response, it's going to get rid of that cold and you never notice it. Because there's been more attention recently to the gut microbiome, you may have already heard this, and I know I've said it before in my videos, that 70% of your immune system lies within your gut. That's in these mast cells, that's in this mucosal tissue. This is really significant because the standard American diet is full of processed foods and fried and sugary and dairy and animal products and things that have a tendency to feed the bad gut guys and starve out the good gut guys. Now, of course, the other things that impact our gut microbiome that you may or may not have heard about are like prescription medicines. That includes antibiotics and birth control. There's a lot of women out there who have been on birth control for years, and the longer you're on birth control, the more issues you're going to have with your gut and with your good gut microbiome not being strong enough. So your immune system starts to go down. If you're somebody like me who was on antibiotics from the time I was an infant, every year, sometimes multiple times a year, I destroyed my gut microbiome, not knowing any better. And so it takes a while to build that back up. But what I've noticed is that now that my gut microbiome is getting stronger because I've changed the way I do some things, I have a stronger immune system. Now, talking about antibiotics, it sometimes is very necessary. You have to take an antibiotic, but overprescription of them are absolutely going to kill your gut microbiome, and you just need to be aware of that. We have something called epithelial cells that line our gut, that keep pathogens from entering our bloodstream. If that barrier begins to break down due to inflammation because of the bad things we've eaten, right? The pathogens then get into our bloodstream, and this can be anything from an antigen that causes an allergic response or partially broken down animal proteins that eventually lead to autoimmune disease or gastro issues like IBD and gastroenteritis. It's important to restore the good gut. The only way to do this is through your diet, guys. You have to do this in order to keep your immune system working efficiently and effectively. Natural killer cells are lymphocytes that are filled with chemicals that respond to many different pathogens, including cancer cells and inflammation, which we'll talk about. So found in the lymph nodes, your spleen, and red bone marrow, they circulate in the bloodstream to attack cells carrying all these abnormal molecules. So the B and T cells are the most important part of the adaptive immune system. And here's a simplified explanation as to how they work. So B cells secrete antibodies that are specific to individual foreign pathogens. Remember, they made a blueprint, and they fight those pathogens. Every single B cell is programmed to make one specific antibody for one specific infection or invader. For example, there's one antibody for each kind of flu, every kind of cold or virus that you might be exposed to this year. The B cell antibodies neutralize the pathogen, and then other cells called macrophages come and eat them up, like I said, like the Pac-Man. Then as time goes on, those B cells are able to remember what the antigen was, allowing it to attack it faster if that thing shows up again. So even when viruses mutate, okay, like what happens with the flu, what happened a few years ago, your body's immune system recognizes enough of that pathogen and creates antibodies to fight it. T cells work similarly, but they attack microbes inside your cells that antibodies can't get to. So like the B cells, they're specific to a particular pathogen, and memory T cells stick around after the infection to recognize it and eliminate any invaders. There are also regulatory T cells that control the immune response and prevent it from overreacting, which of course leads to autoimmune disease if those regulatory T cells are not working correctly. You know, as a side note, part of what happened in 2020 is that even though we had been exposed to the cousin for many years before that, this particular pathogen was new. And so folks with a compromised immune system, they succumbed to the illness way before their adaptive immune system could even create antibodies to fight it. People with a strong overall immune system were able to fight it off quicker, more completely. I mean, if you remember, people who were on the medicines for chronic diseases or who were obese, they were the ones that were most likely to die or get very, very sick. Their immune system was already compromised because of the chronic disease and inflammation that they had been battling anyway. That's why it's so important to improve your overall health and get off medicines, y'all, for chronic conditions whenever possible. Obviously, you've got to work with your doctor to do this, but just to accept that I'm going to be on this high blood pressure medicine for the rest of my life, or I'm going to be on this psych med for the rest of my life, or I'm going to be on a cholesterol statin for the rest of my life. You're setting yourself up for damaging your immune system even more, which is going to cause you to become more sick with other things. So most people are aware of another major player in the immune system, and that's your lymph nodes. Now, although they're in several of the areas of the body, they are concentrated in your neck, your groin, and your armpit areas, and they're filled with tissue-carrying lymphocytes, the B and T cells, and macrophages, the little Pac-Man guys. They're super important players in that they move these bad pathogens that have already been neutralized by the B and T cells through the lymph system and out of the body. Then the lymphocytes go back up into the lymph nodes, and they provide a blueprint needed to create antibodies against these pathogens. So it's improving our immune response the next time, right? Now, this response, or this process, I should say, can sometimes take days, which is why some people are exposed to flu and they may have a symptom for a few days before they start to feel better, because it takes a minute, right, for some of these things to get through our lymph system. Now, for those of us that were born before we acknowledge that all of our body parts are probably important and we shouldn't just needlessly remove them because it's convenient to do so, we probably had our tonsils removed. I know that I did. I was probably 5 or 6 years old. And I did because I got sick a few times. Well, our tonsils are part of the lymph system, and they're very important to building immunity to pathogens that get us through the nose and the ears and the mouth, right? So they were removed mostly because the medical community thought that they were harboring illnesses, when in fact they were trying to create antibodies to stop the illness. So if you had your tonsils removed by the time you were 5 and 6, I'm going to bet money that you were probably a formula-fed baby. You probably got a lot of dairy, including as you were a toddler, bottles and bottles of milk, which is really probably what caused those issues. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So let's talk about some internal defenses. Inflammation is one of those. Now, inflammation is an internal defense of our body. It gets a really, really bad rap. People don't ever want to have inflammation. But acute inflammation, where we've got an injury or wound like we talked about before, It occurs because our body is sending a bunch of immune systems or cells to that site to facilitate. If the inflammation continues for more than a few days, it could be that there's an underlying condition like I don't know, bacterial infection or a virus or something, or you could maybe have a diet that's allowing that inflammation to continue for a longer period of time. That's not the one I'm most concerned about. What I'm concerned about is chronic inflammation. That occurs when there's uncontrolled inflammation systemically. Arachidonic acid is created in our bodies from the consumption of some plant products, but most of it is created from the consumption of eggs, meat, fish, dairy. It's responsible for many of the symptoms that we experience with chronic system inflammation. So unless our diet changes and we eat more plants and less animal products, this is going to eventually lead to things like connective tissue disorder, cancer, chronic diseases like UTIs or sinus infections or gastroenteritis. All the little conditions with ends with itis, that means that there's inflammation. Another one of our internal defense mechanisms is fever. Now, our bodies have these built-in defense mechanisms, and unfortunately, modern medicine has created some really good ways of messing that up. So we are going to take fever, for example. Fevers are triggered by an infection. The body's temperature rises and speeds up the body's response to the infection. That's the whole point. When our body responds to that infection, it will slow or stop the pathogen from replicating. If you're taking meds to lower a fever, you can stop this process. So unless a fever is dangerously high, so 102 for a child, 103, 104 for an adult, you might want to think twice about medicating. And I got to tell you guys, that was really rough for me because I came from the era that you God gave us acetaminophen and ibuprofen, and you used it as soon as you got a fever. But again, by medicating too quickly, you're not allowing your body to do what it was created to do. So not only is the healing process interrupted, but the damage that's done to the gut microbiome by these NSAIDs are going to take a lot longer to repair. They were approved by the FDA, but nobody had ever done long-term studies on them. And they do make a pretty good hit to your gut microbiome. So you've got to be careful with that. I really wish I would have known about all of this when my kids were little. I was the typical paranoid first-time mom who had her kids at the doctor for every little cold. If we didn't get a prescription or antibiotics, or we weren't given the directive to, give Tylenol and Motrin every couple hours, I felt like it was a wasted trip, and I would badger my doctor until she gave us something. Now I know, unfortunately, that I set my kids' immune systems back years by giving them all those medicines and not allowing their bodies to build up their own immunity. Of course, there's always exceptions. And like I said before, if I'm not a doctor, y'all, okay, you need to listen to your doctor, but question and ask, unless there's a dangerously high fever, is medicine and these NSAIDs, is that really going to help, or is that going to cause more damage down the road? Those instances where you really have to do it because it's an emergency, those are the exception, and they're not typically the rule. So is immunity genetic? Let's talk about those kids who are diagnosed with autoimmune diseases early in life. Is their immunity genetic? And remember that there's 3 types of immunity, right? The adaptive immunity is what happens because you're exposed to pathogens. But both acquired and innate immunities are passed through your parents, their parents, and their parents' parents. So for some reason, some families do have stronger immune systems than others. However, the ability for your body to generate a strong immune system can be improved. You can have a stronger immune system, even if it's not in your personal story up till now. My personal story reflects that, you guys. Listen, I was born into a home where my parents smoked. My mom smoked while she was pregnant. Both my parents smoked in the house up until I was a teenager. So, of course, I had asthma. I was hospitalized as an infant and put on an oxygen tent, or in an oxygen tent, just because I couldn't breathe. I was bottle fed. I did not have the advantage of breast milk. My childhood was filled with antibiotics. Like I said before, every year, sometimes multiple times a year, due to my allergies and these upper respiratory infections I was getting all the time. And that continued well into adulthood. You add to that birth control pills that I took for quite a long time, the standard American diet, which I always ate and ate very well, I might say. My gut and my immune system were totally destroyed. So once I learned what diet and lifestyle choices were perpetuating the continual cycle of illness, I was able to start making different choices. And over time, and we're talking about 4 or 5 years, my health has improved quite a bit. It's certainly not perfect, but y'all, I've only had 2 colds, persistent colds, that lasted more than a day or 2 that I can remember the last 6 years. Now, both of them showed up during times when I was really stressed out. I was eating clean, but I was not eating as clean as I could have been. So I was eating a little bit more convenience foods. I was eating things that were more comfort foods, right? So I'd break out the chips, or I'd break out more of the plant-based ice creams and things like that because I was stressed out. And when I got exposed to somebody who was sick, I ended up with the sickness. But many other times including 2020 and 2021, I was not only exposed to sick people, but I was taking care of them. And I was not utilizing, all the things, the distances and all the things that you were supposed to, right? I never got sick. I never got that particular illness. The diet and lifestyle choices, I believe, that I started making back in September of 2018 have served me very, very well. So if you're struggling with being sick all the time, if you're tired of passing colds around your household, right? Goes from kid that's at school or daycare to mom to dad, back to kid. You know what I mean? If you're just tired of that cycle of constantly passing colds around, then you really should consider making a change. All right, so how do you make a change? Well, here's what you do. You want to protect yourself. You want to build a strong immune function. So there are some things that you can and should be doing right now. And I bet that if you're consistent, I promise you guys, you're going to look back in a few months and you're going to notice a difference. So the first thing, number 1, would be food consumption. If your diet does not include mostly whole plant foods, then you're probably not giving yourself enough dense nutrition to build a strong immune system. Again, remember, back to our immune system, 70% of that is in our gut. And so what we're putting into our gut matters. You're not going to get enough nutrients on a heavily processed diet or one that relies heavy on animal and dairy products. Remember that it's animal and dairy products that cause your body to create excess amounts of this arachidonic acid, which is damaging your cells and it's causing disease. Now, I'm not telling you have to go vegan. I'm not telling you have to be a complete vegetarian. I'm just telling you that if you follow an optimal diet, you will find that you have more energy. You're going to sleep better. You're going to have more stamina. You're going to be able to build a stronger immune system. Now, I recommend that you work toward consuming no dairy because dairy really does clog up your lymphatic system, and that you limit animal foods to 10% or less of your weekly calories. Now, this warrants a longer conversation, one that we can have later, but one thing that the scientists have discovered when they were studying cancer and diet is that when animal protein is 12% of calories, cancer begins to grow. At 11% or less, it does not. Now, if you're concerned about changing your diet and how hard this is going to be, there are a ton of resources. Just look up Google searches for plant-based eating. You're going to find a ton of resources. I've got a mini class called Getting Started, and that will give you a step-by-step exactly how you have to do this to get started in your new plant-based eating habits. All right, the second thing we got to talk about is your gut microbiome. And obviously this is tied directly back to your diet, but also other things like the types of medicines you take, including over-the-counter medicines, your alcohol consumption, and whether or not you're smoking. If you're improving your diet, you want to make sure that you're watching what else you're putting into your system that's not specifically food related. You also might want to consider taking a probiotic. This is going to help your good gut guys so they can populate and repopulate your microbiome in a more healthy way. There's a video on my channel that specifically addresses probiotics and how to take them. You can find that here, someplace, wherever that link may end up showing up when I edit this, but you can find it here. All right, number 3 is weight. Now, my comments here are strictly based on evidence, guys. This is not an opinion about what size pants we should be wearing. The fact is that weight is a primary risk factor for the people who became really, really sick and died in 2020 and 21. It's also a huge risk factor for chronic diseases. We know that fat cells hold extra hormones. That's a risk factor for certain cancers like breast, ovarian, and prostate. So the purpose of this video is to talk about how you can improve your immune system, and honestly, getting to a healthy weight range is one of those ways. Number 4, exercise. Both cardio Even walking, like you walk for 20, 30 minutes a day, that'll do it too. But strength training also, both of those are very, very important factors for improving your immune system. Movement is required for your lymph system, right? We talked about that before. Lymph system is what moves these pathogens through our body and gets out, and movement is what causes that. It doesn't have its own way of draining unless you're moving your body. So if you're sedentary, it is very unlikely that your lymph system is working properly, certainly not working at its best capacity. Number 5 would be sleep. Now, most people, there are a few exceptions that only require 5 or 6 hours, but most people require 7 to 8 hours of sleep to allow their cells to regenerate, allow their body's immune system to carry out the trash, as it were. So if you're not getting a good night's sleep, then you need to take immediate action right now to change that. You've got to get into a pattern of going to bed at the same time every night, waking at the same time every morning if you possibly can. Those of you who travel a lot, I know it's unable to do this, but a regular sleep pattern is going to help you get the restorative sleep you need. So it's really important for you to research a little bit on how to do that. Last, stress. Like I mentioned before, the 2 times that I was sick enough to be memorable in the last several years, I was under stress, mostly from traveling and moving and some things going on in our lives. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. This is my life story. For most of my adult years, from the time I was 25 till I was about 50, I lived under a constant state of stress. Now, this was mostly due to outside factors like my job. My job is very stressful. I was traveling a lot. Our finances for a good bit of that, especially in our younger years, were horrible. I was parenting young children for most of that. All of those financial and parenting issues, sometimes called marital conflicts, that didn't help as well, right? Stress became so normal to me that I didn't know how to live any other way. I was proud. I would proudly tell you that I was great at stress management because I lived at such a high level of stress all the time. When I decided to change my diet and lifestyle choices that impacted my health, reducing stress was a priority. Now, for me, it meant slowing down a little bit, not committing to as many outside obligations because I was a W-2 employee as well as doing things every single night of the week until 10, 11, 12 o'clock. I was getting very little sleep. I was under constant stress. I had to stop all that. I had to stop a lot of those outside obligations. For me, it also meant starting a garden and enjoying the satisfaction of growing our own food. I had so much fun with that. Spending more time, quality time with my family. That's something that I put in my calendar now. I specifically make conscious effort to spend time with my dad and my kids and friends, even if it's now that I've moved and I'm far away from a lot of them. I even try to make sure that I have conversations with them on a regular basis. Cooking healthier foods from scratch was part of that process. Exercise, all of these things that we've talked about already were impacting my stress levels, which has really improved my immune system. You guys, I can't tell you, I've not been on an antibiotic in over 6 years, which is light years from 2 to 3 time a year prescriptions that I used to get. Between my sinus infections and UTIs and everything else, I was constantly on a prescription. So this is what I encourage you guys to do at this point. I really want you to sit down and evaluate what things in your life bring the most stress, and then evaluate what things bring you the most joy. Start spending more time doing the things that bring you joy and less time doing the things that bring you stress. So now the ball's in your court. It's your turn, right? It's your decision. Are you going to do things that are going to help increase your immune system and increase your health, improve your health, and help you live longer and healthier? So if you're serious about making some changes and building your immune system and being less sick and less stressed and more happy and more full of joy, then I want you to do 2 things. I want you to go down below in the description box and I want you to click on the Food Over Medicine presentation, Food Over Medicine Live presentation. It's something I'm going to be doing here starting at the end of February, and it's going to be monthly. So regardless of when you're listening to this video, you're going to be able to participate in one. I'm going to give you a little more detail of how food can be utilized to heal our bodies so that we don't have to stay on as many medicines or even start taking medicines if that's the case. The second thing I want you to do is I also want you to click on the link for my microgreens class. I talked about the fact that I really enjoy growing my own food. You guys, it is so much easier than you think it's going to be, and everybody can start. I don't care where you live. Right now, I live in a motorhome and I can still grow microgreens. You can grow microgreens whether you're in a dorm room or an apartment, an assisted living facility, or your house. Everybody can do this, and it's going to be a major step in increasing your immune system and moving toward better health. All right, so it's a free class. It has videos, audio, a little bit of typewritten stuff. So regardless of what your learning style is, you're going to get something out of this. I want you to do two things. I want you to sign up for the Food Over Medicine live presentation, and I want you to click on that microgreens class, and I want you to take it. Here's to being better and staying healthy.